attorney to prepare an ordinance that would replace the use of the term owner with the term guardian in those portions of the animal control ordinance that pertain to cats and dogs. And there is an ordinance in the agenda packet that attempts to do that. I'm not sure that anything that the council's considered recently has generated as much correspondence as this item. And, you know, at least on one side of the issue is concerns about the implications of using the term guardian rather than owner to describe the person who's responsible for a dog or cat. And I've attempted to address that sort of larger concern by providing a definition of the term guardian in the ordinance, which is that it only means owner as defined in the ordinance and doesn't mean anything else. And I think that definition addresses the problem of, at least from the standpoint of, say, the city's animal control officer, or if any dispute winds up in an administrative proceeding or in court, there won't be any question as to what the term guardian means as used in this ordinance. And I think I made the comment in the agenda summary report that it should avoid confusion. And I want to backtrack on that a little bit. I'm not sure it will completely avoid confusion. If somebody reads or hears the use of the term guardian, you know, they're gonna initially interpret that word in its common usage. They're not going to go looking up the definition of guardian as it's used in the ordinance specifically to understand that it means something different than it normally means. So I think it could create some confusion in that way. But if and you know, by defining it to mean owner, it doesn't add anything to the ordinance itself in terms of administering the ordinance. So there is some possibility of some confusion, I think, in people that hear that term or read that term if they don't understand that it's being used in a different way than it normally is. And I think that on the other side of the coin, all of the correspondence we've been getting from people that are urging the council to do this is based on the assumption that guardian does mean something different than owner, and they want people to apply that definition when they read or see that term in connection with someone who's responsible for a pet. So I think you have to take that into consideration also in deciding whether this is something you want to do with this ordinance. But ultimately, it's a policy decision for the council to make, and I think you can do it without creating administrative problems, at least in terms of how the ordinance would be administered by city staff or how it would be interpreted by the courts or an administrative hearing. So unless you have questions, that's the extent of my initial report.
Councilmember Thomas.
Well, my is eager. Mr. Rapport, is there an alternative to the outright substitution of one word for the other? It has been suggested that we could, in fact, use both terms in the city ordinance conjointly with the understanding that they do mean the same thing, but does preserve the word owner in there as a possible way of eliminating confusion. Well,
you could do that, and you could do the same thing that I've done with owner. You could define that term. If you said owner/guardian or owner-guardian or whatever, you could define that so that it would be clear what it means in the context of the ordinance. I'm not sure that it completely eliminates the confusion, only maybe eliminates half of it, you know, because if someone sees that owner/guardian and don't read what that is intended to mean, they're going to wonder, well, what does that mean? You know, what is an owner/guardian as opposed to just an owner or just a guardian? But, you know, so I don't know that you can completely get away from it. It may reduce it to some degree, or it may change the nature of the confusion a little bit, but and at least as far as whether you can do it or not, yes, I think you can do it, and I think if you defined it as I have owner, it would, you'd have the same effect as you do under the proposed amendments.
Councilmember Rudd.
One of the arguments in opposition to this proposal is the idea, and we'll probably hear it tonight, but I thought I'd run it past you, is the idea that if we were to make this change, this would open the floodgates to increasing animal rights, that this is just would be one step that would lead us closer. And I wonder if, from your point of view, would changing the wording in this code, in our code, do that?
Well, it focused narrowly on the city's animal control ordinance and whether it would open the floodgates to, you know, something based on doing that in the animal control ordinance. I don't think it would. If it, as far as some sort of long-term strategy for changing how society treats the relationship between people and animals, I'm not in a position to comment on that. It could be part of a broad strategy to do that, and maybe if the language appears often enough, it could, you know, because, you know, the guardian does have meanings, you know, in the dictionary and in state statutes where you have conservatorships or guardianships that are set up specifically. Those terms have very different meanings than the way it would be used in this ordinance. In terms of the ordinance, no. Part of the reason is, you know, the ordinance is really, as I started at the beginning, I was pointing out the ordinance is concerned with making sure that pets aren't a public health or safety risk and don't create a nuisance. You know, that it requires the dog to be under control when it's out. It's not the owner or person in charge of the pet at that moment in time is supposed to prevent it from defecating on public property or to clean up the results if it occurs. It's that kind of thing. They have to make sure the dog's properly licensed. They can't harbor an unlicensed animal. It uses the term owner, person in control, custodian, uses a variety of terms to describe the person but it's whoever is in control of the pet at the time that prohibition or requirement applies. You know, that's the person that has to do that, and it's really focused on things that person has to do to prevent that animal from being a problem. It's not focused on what the obligations are of that person to the pet. It's based on what the person's obligations are to the community to prevent that pet from creating a problem.
Is there, before we hear from the people present, is there any further discussion at this point in time? Councilmember Thomas?
Yeah, as has been noted, we have had just for me, unprecedented amount of communication. And we had a very, very lengthy council meeting on this topic several weeks ago. The purpose of public comment, I think, might be twofold, or at least twofold. But I think the primary purpose would be to present information and points of view to those of us here who have to vote on it. Present material to us that might influence the decision that we make. So there might be other purpose, which is simply the opportunity to make a public statement that is shared with both people here and people watching it, and that's also a valid purpose. But I'm very mindful of the fact that this matter has. Well, let me just say that I would be very surprised if I hear